Well, now, generally speaking, then, various kinds of objects apparently have been identified by witnesses. There have been the saucer shapes, and this is the most popular version. There have been the long cigar-shaped affairs, and there have been round globes, which seem to hover over cars and stop their ignitions, as you mentioned. This has happened to railroads. Planes have had trouble. There have been many pilots to report that their whole electrical systems went out in seeing some such thing, and then only in the nick of time does it come back. Some planes have been lost completely unexplainably. Whole squadrons of planes have disappeared, where there's been a rise in magnetic activity. All of these things tend to, in a peculiar sort of way, corroborate one another, or at least lead to similar questions. Am I overstating the case here?
Well, that's quite correct, and as you mentioned, there seem to be quite a variety of types of these UFOs.
All right, gentlemen, we're just about time to get up to the news. Immediately after the news, I want to go into one other matter, and I think you had some concern with this, Mr. Hopf, or at least know something about it. Perhaps you do too, Mr. Webb. One object that was seen to get into trouble and explode down over Brazil, and chunks of this object, made of whatever, fell into a lake. And they recovered some of these pieces, and there have been numerous tests done on them. And I want to get into what that test showed, perhaps some conclusions that we can make very early and without all of the information that both of your organizations certainly have on file. And then we want to open up the phones to anybody who has any other stories, and I suppose you would welcome this. Maybe we can add to the file of both NICAP and APRO. And this is something I know you're both looking for. And questions or comments or curled lips, we're open to them all. So we'll see you in 5. Meantime, the magic word is UFO. Unknown flying objects. Are they real? Are they imaginary? My two guests this evening, Walter Webb and John Hopf, both believe, though they are natural skeptics, but also they're scientists in their fields, one a professional photographer, the other a lecturer in astronomy, both very much interested in the subject, and they believe there is something out there that has not been adequately explained. We've been talking about this for some time here on Nightline, but right now we want to get to some facts. Now, Mr. Hopf, I believe it was in 1957, that a most unusual occurrence took place down in Brazil at a place known as Ubatuba. I think I'm pronouncing it right. U-B-A-T-U-B-A. Looks like Ubatuba, but I guess they say Ubatuba.
Something like that.
Apparently, an unknown flying object, a flying saucer, attempted to make a maneuver that was even a little too much for them and exploded. Not very far above a beach and a lake, and pieces of this object fell down and were recovered. Great tests were done by physicists and chemical analysis and radiological analysis and I don't know what all. Metallurgists and so forth. And a very scientific investigation that took quite some time, and they made more than one test. And what was proved that this material was made of?
Well, a series of tests were made by the Brazilian Mineral Resources Board, which had some excellent laboratory facilities. They made a number of spectroscopic tests on 2 or 3 different types of machines, and the results were very conclusive that this material was magnesium of a purity beyond what we consider laboratory standard. And at that time, I don't believe that any, in fact, I know no metal fabricating plant in the world would have made metal of this purity in a quantity that would be required to build any sort of a flying device. Of course, there'd be no sense in making, as far as we could see, in making any sort of flying machine out of pure magnesium.
First of all, it isn't the strongest thing in the world.
That's right.
And has all kinds of qualities that we would consider absolutely impossible.
Well, it's quite ridiculous to make anything out of magnesium of almost 100% purity. The most refined tests that were conducted on this material by the Brazilian Mineral Resources Board failed to show any impurities. The purity was beyond any laboratory standard samples that they had. I understand that recently additional tests were made in this country by a number of, or by at least 2 laboratories, one laboratory of the Atomic Energy Commission, and another one by an independent chemical company laboratory. And these tests confirm the findings of the Brazilian laboratories that this material was definitely not a man-made material. Now, I'm not a metallurgist. I'm really out of my field here. However, I talked to Dr. Fontes. He came here to Boston to meet me a year ago.
That is a scientist in Brazil who is also interested in unknown flying objects. Yes.
I'm sorry, we hadn't gotten into that. But Dr. Fontes followed through these reports and tests very exhaustively. And after talking with him, I was completely convinced that there was no question of the fact that these tests were authentic and indisputably accurate.
And consequently, this material seemed to show that it had an extraterrestrial, I can never say that word.
There wasn't any question that this material... now, if you like, I could go into the what happened when we sent samples of this material to the United States government.
Yes, what did?
Do you want to go into that now?
Sure.
One sample was sent to the United States Air Force, and this sample was accidentally burned up in the spectroscope due to some error of the operator. I'm not familiar with the operation of the spectroscopic machines, but another sample was then requested, and this second sample, am I right here, Walter? The second sample was tested in a contaminated machine. In other words, in order to determine the purity of a material,
the electrodes themselves enter into it.
Well, it seemed that a previous test had been made in the machine, and the fragments, the machine had not been correctly cleaned. You see, in order to detect impurities of a very fine degree by a test of this type, the machine must be completely cleaned in a manner that's completely beyond our ordinary standards of cleanliness.
So what you're saying is that the second test
was inconclusive. It showed traces of materials that were the result of the fact that these materials had been left in the testing apparatus.
Right.
The Air Force then requested more samples, and of course we drew the line here. I don't know how many pieces of this material are still on hand, but I know we had a number of fragments. And,
but it was completely pure magnesium.
Yes, the various tests that have been made certainly show this.
Mr. Stone is with us, and we'll get to him in just a moment. Mr. Stone, you're on WEEI's Nightline. Go right ahead.
All right. I was going to ask two questions. The first was going to be dealing with ball lightning, but that's been preempted already.
Right.
And the second was going to be a question about the weight and size of the magnesium sample referred to in tonight's conversation.
All right. Mr. Hopf, I think, has that.
I don't have the figures right in front of me. I believe these samples were varied from a fraction of an inch to 2 or 3 inches in size.
All right.
I'm not sure of the weight.
Okay. Now, you made some statements about it not being man-made.
Yes.
Well, you can make metals or semiconductors or anything you want of almost unlimited purity nowadays in laboratories in ultimately very large quantities. So
yes.
I don't see how you can come to the conclusion about its man-made nature or non-man-made nature.
Well, I realize that metallurgical science has improved quite a bit in the last few years. However, at the time of this sighting and at the time these fragments were picked up, no one in the world, to our knowledge, either had the facilities or the need or the desire to make pure magnesium in a quantity that would be required to make a flying device.
Okay, now what was the year?
1957, wasn't it, Mr.
That's
Hopf?
right.
Okay, and can you give an estimate of any purity estimate at all of the magnesium?
Well, let's see. The entire report's right in front of me, but I don't know whether I can take the time to go through the entire report. As I say, I'm not a metallurgist. However, I'd recommend that you get a copy of the book, which has an exhaustive treatment of it. The title of the book is The Great Flying Saucer Hoax, published by William Frederick Press, New York. And any book dealer can get this for you. If you're interested in this angle, I'd recommend that you get it. The metallurgical report itself occupies certainly 50 or 60 pages.
I think I have just found one thing here that maybe I can give you. This one report, sir, Mr. Stone.
Yes.
An emission spectrograph test showed the presence of trace elements to this amount. Now, wait a minute. No, that's the one about, excuse me. That's the one here in the United States. That one was no good.
Why was it listed as contaminated?
Because of the electrodes, I guess.
Well, no tests were made by the government in this country that were properly conducted.
Okay, now who says that these things were not properly conducted? What is the criterion? In other words, you were about to quote an emission spectrograph.
Yes, I was looking at the wrong one, sir. I'm sorry.
All right, then let me go. This seems to be, to my mind, something foggy about this. You mentioned in the course of your conversation that the AEC had performed tests on the magnesium. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Recently.
Oh.
The original tests performed under Air Force auspices were aborted for one or two reasons. In one case, they burned up the sample accidentally, or I should say, the sample was destroyed before the test could be properly set up. I'm not sure what the procedure is to test metal samples, but the sample was destroyed accidentally. In the second test, it was discovered after the test was completed that the machine was contaminated with the results of a previous test.
All right. Now, what laboratory did that? What Air Force laboratory?
I'm not sure, but it was conducted under official government sponsorship.
Okay. Can you mention perhaps what the results of the AEC tests were?
Well, this gets a little complex.
The more recent tests confirm the three Brazilian tests, which were made independently of each other in order to determine no bias.
And what were the results of these?
They confirm the fact that this material was of a purity greater than the laboratory standard for pure magnesium.
Oh, okay, fine. That's something. Now that's something definite.
I hesitate to go on any further with these details because no one's a specialist up here. The only thing is, this is a very exhaustive treatment of this with all of the tables and all kinds of tests that I can't read. Only a specialist and a scientist in this field would really understand.
Well, I'm in solid state, so
well, this would be right up your alley. You'd even be able
I'd like to break in here. Apparently, this man's an expert on metals. I have had these tests examined by a number of metallurgists, and including some connected with the government in Newport, and their opinions are conflicting. In other words, it's possible for different people to interpret these tests in different ways. I'd certainly recommend that you get a copy of the original book.
I think you keep yourself fascinatingly occupied for at least a full day, maybe more.
All right.
Okay, Mr. Stone.
All right, thank you.
Thank you for calling.
The hundreds and thousands of groups that have sprung up throughout the world that have made a cult, and in some cases a real religion, out of the UFO question, I'm afraid that we have been simply overwhelmed by the tremendous number of people that seem to have a need to develop some new type of religion, which is what it is really. Many groups are frankly religious.
Well, now, Mr. Hopf, I hope that this program tonight, and your being on it, and Mr. Webb's, shows you that at least I'm serious about this. And I hope that this has been a small voice, and maybe not so small, in giving some of your original and I hope not too tarnished beliefs in what you were doing. Mr. Webb, how about NICAP? Is it looking toward something of the same matter as APRO, or has it got a little different viewpoint?
Well, I think it is a shame that these fan clubs, these little cult groups, have sort of confused the issue, if I may put it that way. There are serious groups around, and I think the two that come to mind, of course, are APRO and NICAP. As for NICAP, it has two goals, really, that I can think of. One of them is a congressional investigation of the Air Force investigation.
As to why it's been so bottled up and
as to why everything's bottled up, and it seems that these serious civilian groups like APRO and NICAP arrive at one conclusion and the Air Force arrives at another, at least publicly. And we get the impression that there are facts and information that's being withheld from the public. So perhaps, we hate the idea, but perhaps the only way to do it would be to attempt a congressional investigation.
Well, some congressmen have shown a great interest in
this.
They
have shown a tremendous interest in it, and I think that NICAP does have the backing if I may say this, NICAP is about ready to publish a report called the UFO Evidence, and it's a summary of 7 years of NICAP investigations. They will include a lot of sightings in this report, and it's due to come out early next month. We think this could be the spark. We hope that it will be the spark for Congress to get on the ball here with a possible investigation. Now, that's one goal. Through this means, perhaps a scientific investigation would be the next step. But I think that it's got to be gotten out into the open first, and perhaps this NICAP report will do this. When it gets out, when the public realizes that there's something behind this secrecy that's going on, something behind the UFO story as far as that goes, then the interest may be generated. And we can hope for a scientific investigation.
Good. Well, I wanted you to at least state what the two organizations were trying to do. Yes, Mr. Hopf.
I can't help but comment on what Walter has said. I agree completely with the purposes of NICAP. I don't want people to get the impression that I'm opposed to them. I'm a member of NICAP, and I've supported them financially. And I certainly hope that they could get a congressional subcommittee to investigate. However, I don't think this will ever come about because there are too many skeletons in the closets of the military and the Pentagon. I think that Pentagon must have 50 million closets in it. I'm afraid that any sort of an investigation that was conducted by Congress would be conducted 100% behind closed doors. The few little inquiries that Congress has held, a few subcommittees have held investigations on this subject in the past, and the only speakers who testified at these hearings, I've said this backwards, the only statements that were released to the press from these hearings were statements of Air Force spokesmen.
Mm-hmm. With the public attitude that we've already become familiar with.
That's right. And I don't give any hope to the idea that Major Kehoe has. It's a wonderful, glorious crusade.
Well, then you must believe,
but
Mr.
I
Hopf,
don't believe that he'll ever get a congressional investigation.
You must believe, your view is a little more cynical, perhaps, than Mr. Webb's, but then you're a little older than he is.
I think I've been in the thing a little bit too long, maybe. I'm honestly weary of butting our heads up against a stone wall. We have never been able to get any coherent policy statements from the government on this subject.
Well, you must believe then, sir, that this whole investigation of UFOs, or the whole evidence such as it exists, is one which is either so secret or has such terrifying, at least in the opinion of some of our governmental leaders, perhaps military, implications that they feel that for our best interest they must keep it bottled up. Of course, I'll take issue with who should decide my best interest, and I gather you feel the same way.
Well, one of the theories, and at one time it was my favorite theory, is that the reason the government has gone to great lengths to discredit authentic witnesses and to ignore some of the authentic evidence that we have is that the real truth about the UFO situation is simply too horrible to make public. And this is a very sad conclusion I have to come to, but I don't know what other conclusion you can reach. I hate to feel that the whole thing is being concealed because the government has made such a botch of the whole thing that they hate to have the truth come out of the mishandling of this subject.
But, gentlemen, it isn't just our Congress who can be concerned. These sightings have been all over the world, and there are other Congresses and there are other governments. Now, is there any hope here?
Well, possibly. I might mention that, in fact, the Brazilian Air Force back in 1954, and this is in direct contradiction with anything that's been released by our own Pentagon in this country, they held a press conference and released 3 tentative conclusions at that. Now, remember, this is back in 1954. They have since changed their tune a little bit, I think, and closed down just as the U.S. Air Force has done.
But when they were speaking openly, they said what?
Here are their 3 conclusions. They concluded that, 1, the UFOs were real. Number 2, they were revolutionary aircraft of some sort. And number 3, that the origin was unknown. Now, they don't come right out and say that they're spaceships from another planet, but they are hinting at it, and this is certainly a step in the right direction. But you see, something's happened. Even the Brazilian Air Force has closed the lid down.
Yes. Gentlemen, thank you for at least making clear some of your thoughts about what this means, and I apologize to those of you who are on the phone and waiting, and we're going to get to you right away, but we do have a little message for you first.